All right, healthy MSPs grow at around 20% per year. So if you did 3 million last year, you're expected to do 3.6 million this year. Now, some can grow a lot faster and some will grow a little bit slower, but in all cases, current client growth plays a very important role, somewhere between 7 to 10% of that growth in your organization. That growth is going to come from 3 different buckets: inflation, agreement growth, and service expansion. Now, inflation is typically the easy one. You're going to grow your agreements and your hourly rates within around 2% of Consumer Price Index, or CPI, for the year on January 1st or on the agreement renewal. You can do it on any date, but doing it on January 1st just makes it a clean sweep, and you can do all agreements at once to start changing that rate going forward. Agreement growth just means that that business that you're contracting with already has grown. So if they hired 10 employees and you do per user pricing, you're going to increase your agreements by 10 users. And the last bucket is service expansion. And this just means that a current client bought a new service from you. And this could be a project, or maybe they're a managed service client that started buying your cybersecurity package. Now, with inflation, agreement growth, and service expansion equaling that 10%, one of the challenges we see with this whole process is that MSPs typically, especially early in their maturity, don't manage this process very well. Knowing that they can consistently get 10% growth just from their current client base isn't enough. They spend all their time focusing on new logo acquisition, which is a really important part of growth. But we already have these clients, and it's typically the easiest growth factor in our MSP. So whether it's not having an annual inflation process in place, not truing up accounts on at least a quarterly basis to make sure we're getting new revenue for existing clients' growth, or not making sure we align current services with the right clients so that they have a path to purchase those over time, we're giving up on the easiest piece of growth that we have in our organization. So today we're going to give you 3 tips that most MSPs do not do well that'll help you consistently see that 10% growth in your MSP just from your existing clients. And we're going to start out with goal setting. Now, when we think of goals, we typically think of our team or our own company goals. But by working with your clients to try and help them set technology goals, you can significantly improve their understanding of their current situation and what it takes to protect organizations in today's world. The big difference here is we're not preaching to them about the challenges. We're working with them to try and identify how to attack these challenges, which is where the impact comes from. Now, when we're talking to our clients about goal setting, we're typically going to have 3 phases that we want to understand. Number 1, what are the minimum standards? And these are typically going to be our documented minimum standards in our service catalog. If you don't have a service catalog, I'll have a link in the show notes to help you create one. But going forward, we want to make sure we have a set of technologies that's required for every client. And the goal in those minimum standards is to make sure we're reducing risk for ourselves and our client, and we were reducing the amount of labor we have to apply to the client to make sure that it's in line with other service agreements. From there, we need to understand where the client should be. What technologies should they be leveraging? What cycles should they be following? What processes do they need? This is where you're going to work hand in hand with them to understand their business risks and try to develop processes, procedures, and technologies that will help solve those problems. Now, once we know the bookends, we know our minimum standards and we know where they should be, we just need to identify where they're at and the gap between where they're at and where they should be. These are going to be the goals that we create for that organization to move forward with their technology. Now, a lot of MSPs say they do this, but in reality, we typically just say, here's the 3 things you need to do, now go do it. We want to work with them in this process to create these goals. From there, number 2 is budgeting. We need to understand how much this stuff costs, these gaps are going to cost, so that the business can put it into their budget. If you get to a business of any size, they're going to want to budget annually for their technology expenses. Now, a lot of times we'll come in and say there's going to be a 3% increase of inflation next year, and here's the 2 projects that you should do. But by tying it to the goals that they've self-assigned, you can now put it quarter by quarter basis and make those conversations more impactful, be involved with the budgeting process, and help them pay for these solutions that you know they need. Now, the last step is where things get really interesting and is where you can make significant impact both with your client and with your growth goals. And that's going to be setting a scorecard. Now, when we think of scorecards, just like goal setting, we typically think of an internal thing that we would do. And by adding this to your process, we can build a scorecard that shows the gaps that are there from technology, because those are going to be continually growing, right, if the company isn't moving forward. and where they're at based on the progress that they themselves have said is necessary. Now, this little added pressure helps shift the conversation from us as the MSP community telling them what they need to do to us as the MSP community helping them understand where they're at in their own process. So by attacking each of these steps, we can significantly increase the engagement, understand more about our client's business, and help them move the ball through the process. Now, the challenge with all this is it's going to take a lot of time to do this right. But that's where the beauty comes in, because we should be charging enough for our services to spend the time to properly set goals, properly budget with our clients, and then help keep them accountable in our quarterly review process. And if you, the owner, are the only person in your organization that can execute these activities, you're going to have to start with a handful of them and move your way into more and more as you can bring your team up to be able to have these conversations. And while these 3 steps may not align with the technical conversations that we've always had, it's going to move us into business conversations where the real advisory sits. When we can match up business need with the services we provide, we are in great shape, and we are going to continually grow and build on that client. And that's it. If you want consistent client growth at or above the standard of 20%, focusing on current client growth is going to be a very important piece of the puzzle. By ensuring that we attack growth in all 3 areas, including inflation, agreement growth, and client expansion or service expansion, we can ensure and count on that 7 to 10% growth every year. Now, there may be years where inflation is higher than agreement growth, or agreement growth is higher than service expansion, and that's okay. We're going to have ebbs and flows in our economy and in our region, so they're going to take over for each other depending on the year. But you're only going to get very, very consistent with this process if you're having conversations on what the goals are for each business. You're helping them budget through that process, and then you're keeping them accountable through a scorecard so that they can see the progress that they've self-assigned. I'm Jim Peterson, Principal Solution Advisor at ConnectWise, and we're here to help, so hit us up. And until next time, thank you very much.